Bonjour tout le monde, and nice to see everybody. We are continuing the theme of success with my terrific panelists here. I want to start, if we're going to talk about success, I want to start on a more personal note. Luis, I'm going to go to you because you began your career as a research assistant at the University of Waterloo. No shout-outs for Waterloo there, so we'll do a whoo on stage. But talk a little bit, so you're a PhD mathematician, a YouTuber, author, which is grokking machine learning.
Yes.
Talk about your own background. What brought you to Cohere?
Yeah, so thank you. I started my career as a mathematician, and the plan was I was going to be a professor. But suddenly, I got interested in machine learning about 10 years ago, when the first boom, when you started, like, computers started being able to tell what was in an image, what was on text. So I got really interested and moved to Silicon Valley, and I started working on different things. So I worked on recommendation systems. At some point, I worked in quantum machine learning, different things, and a lot in education. So a lot of it was explaining, and that's why I started the YouTube channel. That's when I wrote the book, and different ways of educating the public in machine learning. And recently, I mean, I've always been interested in language. First of all, it's as a technical problem, it's very interesting, and to me the applications are just very wide, because everything. I mean, the language is the way we communicate everything.
Yeah, it's foundational what
yes.
you're doing. So.
And if you understand language, you can almost solve other problems, right? Like, for example, problems in medicine, you can solve by understanding medical records and answering stuff from there. So it's just so ubiquitous, and it can solve so many other problems that I thought, okay, language is really cool.
You get the academic muscle with potentially a bigger paycheck. Potentially.
Exactly.
We'll see. So let me turn to you a second. Kory, because I was fascinated in you've got a master's in philosophy, which gives me hope to all the creative, Bachelor of Arts, Masters of Arts in the audience. What did you want to be, and how did you end up in this role, essentially, venture capitalist?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I feel like my life is sort of like sitting in the back of a truck looking backwards, as opposed to intentionally going anywhere forwards. For my undergraduate, I have philosophy, English, and I almost had a minor in Latin.
In Latin.
So if you tried to create possibly the least employable person coming out of university, that would have been me in my undergrad. But essentially, I grew up in Waterloo region. So we've got these Waterloo roots, right, Louise? I went to school, and when coming out of school, I worked for an organization called Communitech, and got really into startups there. Did a bunch of early stage investing, and then from there, sort of had some serendipitous relationships to go to Google, and then out to Inovia, mostly following excellent people around, right?
Well, and so to be clear, that part of the reason the two of you are on stage is you led the last big round of funding for Cohere. So I want to start actually with that and stick with you a second, Kory, because you talk about, because your 10,000 hours is seeing a lot of people coming by, asking for money, asking for investment. What did you see in Cohere?
Yeah, so.
And what took you so long?
What took us so long? Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting story, right? I would say, so we just led the C round, which means that there was a seed A and B before we led it.
So there's the early seed investing. C is when it's really going to scale. Is that the best way to describe a C round?
Yeah, it's a later stage injection of money of when you're going from into more commercialization space.
Like you.
Yeah, that's right, which is Louise is doing. So candidly, I joined Inovia, and a guy named Steve Woods, who we did this deal at Inovia. We were both at Google for 10 years before that, and we met the founders there. So Nick Frosst and Aidan, Ivan's the other founder, but we met Nick there. And Nick used to work on Google Shopping with Steve. And
Google Shopping?
Google Shopping.
Oh, Google Shopping.
It was a product called Google Shopping.
Yes, I've used it.
Yes, it's not the most popular shopping product in the world.
No, Shopify is. No,
yeah.
That's different, totally different product.
So, so what happened was Jeff Hinton was at Google. Jeff is the godfather of artificial intelligence, one of them, the three being Jan LeCun, Joshua, and Jeff. And so we were working with Jeff, trying to get him to expand his research teams at Google. And so we were convincing him one of the things you have to do is you have to take on research engineers, right? But Jeff has this funny sort of belief that I'll ascribe to him, is that the engineers are sort of like the monkeys on the typewriter, and the mathematicians are the real geniuses, and which I'm sure Luis agrees with.
Would you agree with that, Luis, a PhD mathematician nodding his head?
He's doing all the hard work. So, we finally convinced Jeff to take a couple people, and so we gave him this list, and the list was the top practical ML engineers in the country for Google. And these are people who had created the real-time bidding system for ads for the world, making Google like $20 billion a year. Like, there's some real serious resumes. And Jeff took 2 people. And he took 2 20-something-year-olds who had gone to the University of Toronto.
The ones who were frustrated that things weren't getting done at Google.
Is the ones who had taken his class, is what he did. And one of those people was Nick Frosst. And so Nick went off and started working with Jeff. That's where Nick met Aidan. And then the Transformer paper, which was a seminal paper, and they came out and started Cohere. So when I came out of Google and Steve came out of Google, first thing we did is like, what's Nick and Aidan up to? And then that's when we
your first
started.
opportunity you put in money. So that's a good testament. So because let me go to you, Luis. I think one of the things about Cohere, a lot of people think of it, and I think fairly so, is it's a direct competitor to ChatGPT, which people have been using almost as a surrogate for generative AI. You told me what differentiates it in the space and how you think about it in terms of describing to people why it's transformational.
Yeah, that's a great question. At Cohere, we're actually focused on large language models, but on actual applications to industry, to enterprise. So we look carefully at like what are the problems that a company has, and that's where we focus. So I like to see language AI not just as language generation, as getting the computer to talk, but I like to see it as 2 things: language understanding or representation, and language generation. And most of the applications that are useful are more into the language understanding. So for example, search, like a chatbot, for example, can talk, but can also hallucinate a lot.
Yeah.
If you pair it with search, so you instead search for the answer in the manuals of the company or in the internet or in just places, and bring it and tell the generator, talk from there, it will be much more precise and accurate, and it will also have show its work. Be like, this came from here, this came from there. So those kind of solutions, summarize, for example, classify. We basically look at what the problems are in the companies, and we make solutions out of there. And we also focus on what the companies need. They need privacy, so they need that we don't see their data.
Is that different from anybody else? I mean, is everybody offering? Everybody's talking about privacy. Do you feel you guarantee it in a way that others don't?
We definitely guarantee the privacy, and I can speak for others.
I know.
But
anonymous others.
Yeah.
No names. No names shall be used.
But we definitely guarantee the privacy, and also not just from us, but also from the cloud service, right? Like AWS won't see their data either.
So you're agnostic.
Yes, and
some
very
only
important,
use AWS.
Yes, some of them will only use AWS or Azure, depending on what company you work in. But for us, it's completely cloud agnostic. If you work on your own, or if you work with Google Cloud or AWS, it plugs in pretty easily. And the last thing is fine tuning. So you don't just want something that talks great and responds, but you want to be able to fine tune it with your own data and with your own goals and the way you work. So these models are very customizable and very fine-tuned.
One thing, I was listening to the conversations this morning, Kory, and it made me wonder, because we're talking about the hubs in Canada of AI, and clearly Montreal being a major one. What are the pros and cons? This is very much a success story in Canada. It is global, we'll talk about that, but can you talk a little bit about that? Particular advantages and some of the challenges of growing to this scale? Because again, you see a lot of companies come your way.
Yeah, I mean, we see lots of companies. I think that Canada has a lot of advantages, especially in the talent side. The investments made in the early sort of 2010s to do the research institutes and keep the labs here and bring the students are now, this is what's powering a lot of.
So the talent.
Talent's
plus.
Number one for sure. I think that the funding ecosystem has come a long way, but is still growing. But I would say that every Canadian company that we see is usually that's venture backable is global from the start, right? Whether that's a market or from a talent point of view or their customers, it's a great jumping point to serve the world.
Talk about almost like the global arbitrage. What do you keep in Canada? And as you've grown, what has been critical for success in terms of where you locate other offices and who you partner with? Let's start with geography.
Yeah, I mean, for us, talent is a very important thing. So being in Toronto.
You get everything you need in Canada?
We get a lot of what we need in Canada. I mean, the ecosystem in Canada with Toronto, Montreal, like all this area has a lot of great universities, great researchers. So we have a lot of that. But obviously there's a lot of talent elsewhere. So we have a lot of our leadership is in Palo Alto, in Silicon Valley. So we're expanding there. And also we have an office in London where we get a lot of the talent from DeepMind, a lot of the research side.
The deep learning in London, what is specific about Silicon Valley these days that's hard to replicate other places? Because I'm curious, everybody is creating their own version of Silicon Valley or trying to.
Yeah, I think, they just have the experience. Like people there just have seen years of companies growing, companies developing, so they sort of have that vibe there. So it's nice to have that, and also just when you're there, everybody's around you, right? Like you got Google on one exit of the highway and Apple in the other one.
Just
so
wave
that's
to each
that
other
you
as you
yeah,
drive
exactly.
by in whatever electric vehicle one hopes.
Exactly.
But, and then talk about the partnership role, because there is this sense of what do you buy, what do you build, and clearly when people talk about having an AI solution to start, very few people are going to be building these foundational models. They'll be using them. But as you grow, what do you think about in terms of how you grow? Do you build it all, partner?
I mean, yeah, we have a lot of partners. First of all, we have a wonderful community of developers, because to me, the most pleasant thing of my job is that we build the models, but the imagination of what to build with them, it comes from the developers. So we see these wonderful apps, these wonderful solutions that I would never imagine, because there's people who know the problem and solve it with our tools. So it's an honor to see them build with our tools. And then also many of our partnerships are based on that. Our partnership with McKinsey is based on that, right?
Is that access to market too? Because you've got Oracle, McKinsey, all these partners. That must be for enterprise customers, right?
Right, because they have their enterprise customers coming with their problem, and they say, well, I can build this for you with the Cohere, the tools and the Cohere credits, so they can give us access to them and them access to us, so everybody wins.
I want to turn to, first of all, let me start with Cohere, which I should have said at the outset. We're talking about the success story conversation. Do you see it as a success story? Because when I think of VCs, it's always a 7-10-year time horizon. It feels like we're early in.
Yeah, I mean,
there already.
If we were doing it just based on, we were last money in, so for us, it's not a success yet.
No,
right?
It's not, okay.
There has to be a lot of growth in order for, success for a VC firm is when you distribute capital to your LPs, right? So I think what Cohere has is the opportunity to be one of our biggest success stories, because it is a foundational platform of scale, right? Like we were talking about at the bottom, that could be a massive world-changing company. And if that were to happen, then that would be a success. But today, we're just super excited about the journey that they're on.
How would you describe, when you think about the technology and the conditions for success? You mentioned a key one, which was the talent and getting the right talent, obviously transformative talent. Is there anything else? Because when you're looking at companies, it's hard, there are probably some other Coheres out here, but I think a lot of people may be interested in what is it you look for, and what's on your radar in terms of other pockets of opportunity or innovation you're seeing?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of, so just for background, I spend 100% of my time on practical applications of artificial intelligence, which some of it's transformer model, LLM based, and some of it's not. I would say the answer to that question kind of depends on where you play, but the way that I think about it is okay, bare metal is NVIDIA. If you invested in NVIDIA before the jump, congratulations, you probably made lots of money. Next up is cloud, and cloud provides for you containers, compute, storage, those sorts of things. And now there's a new foundational model, which is large language models. And it's a pretty specialized space, and there's probably only a few players at that sort of fully horizontal, generalized language model that, what do you need? You need world-class talent of a small labor source and a couple $100 million in access to compute, even if you have the money, on and on. So that feels, to me, to be a pretty baked space, and that race is happening. And so the question is now, where's the next set of innovation in that space? And we look a lot at tooling. So what happens between the large language model and the application? And this is where you see folks like vector databases and prompt management tools and things like that. And everybody's looking for the next sort of snowflake type organization. And then at the application layer, what we're really looking for is, what are the use cases that are ripe for disruption from incumbents? And so, marketing copy was a great example of this. It very quickly became one of those things where fluency of language changed the game. And so, legal tech space is another really good space here. And I can talk a lot about sort of what we look for when we look at those things, but that's really sort of the outline of it.
When you think about the teams, one of the things that fascinates me about Cohere and just language models in general is, Josh was speaking about this morning, this sort of democratization, because now I did Code Academy, 3 days, nobody should be impressed by that, but you just want to know if you're asking somebody, is it a 9-month fix, a 9-minute fix, good to know. But now you don't need that level of fluency.
Yes.
And how does that open up? I mean, let's talk to the business folks in the audience in terms of, because the success we're talking about, success story of Cohere and its ilk is also now supposed to propel the success story of other companies using these tools. So how does it change the game, and what are some of the most interesting use cases that you would be putting on the radar of people here? In 30 seconds or less. No, I'm kidding. Go ahead. Take your time.
Well, I mean, I think every time there's a big bump in technology, something gets democratized. When the internet, all of a sudden, we have all this information available to us. And this is no different, or even more, because what happens now is that computers are able to understand our language, and this hasn't happened before. Before, if you wanted to program a computer, you have to know the syntax. Now, you can say, I want to build a web page with a banner here and a button here that does this. You can program by speaking, and that means that now the people writing the programs are going to be the people who know the problems to solve, who know the use cases, and not the ones who know syntax only, right? So it's just going to democratize that usage a lot. So that's one, which is us talking to the computer. And the other set of use cases is just all the things that the computer is going to be able to do for us that use a language, right? Like it's going to be able to take care of a lot of the jobs and make them much easier.
Any particular missteps you've seen that you would advise people, like where people get it wrong?
I mean, I think you always have to have a human in the loop. Like if you don't check your work, like in the input and in the output, there should be a human. You should know how to prompt the model correctly, and then also check it. I don't know if you saw the case of the lawyer who used the model for getting a bunch of information and set it in the jury directly.
Cases?
Yeah. And then the cases looked completely real, but they were completely fake, and they didn't check. So you never have to, you can never trust a model for facts. And that's why we put so much emphasis into search, right? Like you for search, and then you know it came from this PDF or from this file. But even then, I would always, everything I get out of the computer, I check it,
Like the sports article where it's, I think they called football a gathering of athletic endeavor.
Exactly,
Yeah, that was the machine talking.
Yep.
Not a good thing.
Something else that happened to me, actually, I put YouTube videos about explanations of machine learning. And one day I started asking the model things, like, tell me this, and it explained some stuff to me that made complete sense. And I thought, whoa, that's genius. And I put it in a video, and then people started like, this is wrong. And I was actually completely wrong. I had to remove that part of the video.
Which exactly. You know, philosopher.
Exactly.
Well, let me. I want to turn to, because I know I'm tapping on your. Well, philosophy and otherwise. There's been a lot of discussion here about ethical AI, and one of the things there is that balance of how do we leverage the technology? What's the role of government? So you're sitting in the place of the funding, and you're very much at the center of this ecosystem of innovation with Cohere and otherwise. What's the advice to policymakers? Because this morning they announced there was a voluntary code of conduct. This is something that governments worldwide are wrestling with. What advice do you have?
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a good question.
I'm making you prime minister.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
go, yeah.
Well, I mean, first thing I would say is that startups and founders are at the center of the ecosystem. We get to be lucky to be a small part in the journey. Yeah.
Okay, I'm doing Dante-esque.
Yeah, it's yeah. I guess the other thing I would say is, look, governments and other people organizations who support ecosystems of startups should take a do no harm policy first, right? So it is already incredibly difficult for anyone to build a company at scale. At global scale from Canada, from anywhere, right? And so your first principle should always be do no harm to that process. And then after that, I like one of our partners, Sean, always says, go away and study it, come back with some ideas, go away and study it, come back with some ideas, and then study it again. And once you know that you
Sean sounds like a joy to work with.
Yeah, he is. He invented the USB key, so we always tease him.
All is forgiven.
We tease him that he created the biggest security risk of any device ever. But my point is once you're fairly certain that you can do something that it enhances the ability for companies to grow in your ecosystem, then do that. But be sure and take a do no harm thing first.
I think one of the things that's interesting when we talk about success is habits, personal habits, but also the habits of the companies. And both of you have worked in other companies. Talk about Cohere, excuse me. Are there particular habits for success that you see in this company or even that you find yourself? I mean, obviously there's focus, but what else would you suggest tactically to people who are trying to build companies right now that you see as some of the habits? For example, you get the money and do you immediately, the food spread is better in the evening so people stay late and work? Give us some tips like.
Well, no, I think people like to be treated well. I think one of the things I like to Cohere is the perks, there's food, there are things like that. I like that.
You only get lunch,
lot.
though.
You get lunch, yeah, no dinner. But I like that a lot. But I think what I like the most of the company is just the openness. I came in not knowing anything about large language models. I can ask the dumbest questions. I normally just grill somebody like, tell me this, that, and everybody is so wonderful. Because we know we have different levels of expertise, right? So that openness is not something you see everywhere. And I really, really appreciate it because it's like going to school, right? It's like going to school for free. You're getting paid to learn. So that's always wonderful.
And it sort of evokes a certain humility. And I think, oftentimes that can be a warning sign if there's not enough humility, perhaps, in terms of what's out there. What else would you say tactically is something you look for?
Yeah, I mean, I think tactically, a small group of high-performing, however you want to define A players, is more effective than a scaled group of an average of B minus, right? So, if you're a startup, those first early hires are incredibly important, and spending your time getting that right and fixing it when you get it wrong early and quickly is one of the most important things that you can do, because all you have is as much time as the money allows in your bank and your burn rate.
Do you have a personal habit that you do every day that you think is, just because I think
every day,
everybody wants a piece of you and everybody wants a piece of you too, so.
Yeah,
besides.
I mean, my personal habit is to try to be the least intelligent person in a room. And that's actually why I agreed to do this panel, because of you two wonderful people, right?
No, I guarantee I'm the least intelligent person in this small room here.
But honestly, that is the habit, right? I like to go to opportunities where I have lots to learn, and that I don't have to be the person to drive the grand thinking. And that's maybe sounds a little lazy, but that's how I've grown most of my
curiosity.
career.
I've met many people that say the hardest thing to hire for is curiosity, because you can ask one question, but you don't follow up with the second and the third, and that's where the magic happens.
Right.
How about yourself?
Yeah, I think curiosity is very important. I try to keep that sort of child thing of like how, everything's amazing and you
These
want to find
videos
out.
are terrific, by the way.
Thank you. Check them
I
out.
was watching them. I was
Serrano
scrolling
Academy.
this morning.
Check them out. www dot. Yeah.
Thank you very much for the heads up. So I find that, for example, like I was a very bad student back in school. I was very distracted, and I would ask questions, and I would just equate it with me being stupid. I would just be like, maybe I didn't understand. I erase that now, and if I have a question, I will ask it, no matter how dumb it sounds, and I have an obsession to understand things very deeply. Until they can't be any break it down until it can't be broken down anymore, and I embraced it.
So take us inside the room a bit about the conversations in Cohere. What's on the radar? What are you guys obsessing over right now? And give us some of a near-term view, and then let's see a bit around the corner.
I mean, this is an interesting place where we are. It's a gap between when the technology comes in and it's fun for everybody, and before it's so universally adopted that it's not even a question if you do it. Like the internet came in, we started playing around, sending emails. I'm that age that I know when the internet.
Everyone's online. Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, I will never ask you, hey, does your company use internet? Obviously, no. Like the same thing's going to happen with large language models. Like in 5 years or even less, nobody's going to be like, do you use large language models? So being in that gap is very interesting. And the question that we always ask ourselves is, how do we bridge that gap, right? Like, how do we make it as easy as possible for enterprise and individuals to adopt this technology to solve the problems they have in order to get here, right? That's the fundamental
more optimism or
question.
fear in terms of what you think about from the external challenge?
No, a lot more optimism. I think I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing if I had more fear than optimism. Obviously, there are risks, and we take them seriously. There are, the long-term hypothetical risks. So we look more like the current ones and how can we fix the ones that are right now. But basically, the conversations we have is, how do we make this? First of all, how do we make the models better? That's always something we're thinking of. Like, how do we make them more powerful, more scalable, less clunky, and
less likely to make up legal cases.
Yeah, exactly.
Example. Yeah.
And also, how do we get to use them? How do we put them in the hands of people as easy as possible, as customizable, as plug and play as you can, with privacy, with all the things that companies want, so that they can just plug in the thing and start working.
How about for you? Tell us in terms of what's on your radar right now, both with Cohere in terms of what the next stage is, but also just in general when you're looking at the environment, what excites you?
Yeah, I mean, probably not surprisingly, it's a bit of a similar answer, just because we're at this, moment in time that seems to come around every 15 or 20 years where something momentous changes, right? So, you get the internet, you've got the graphical user interface, you had mobile, you had cloud, and every time that happens, there's a big reshuffling of the deck, right, of who the major players are, where the value accrues, and how businesses are run. And so, we spend a lot of time thinking about that, and it is, the time cycles on this are hilariously short right now. Like
what?
Well, so I'll give you an example. So Moore's law states that compute doubles every 22 months-ish, 18, 24 months. But the size of models in the last, we're doubling every 5 months. And that's exponential. If you graph that, that's wild, right? And so the change of
Which
pace
is part
of change.
What induces this paranoia in people.
Totally.
Saying, I got to do something. What do I do?
Right, and so, and we're not immune to that. We're like, okay, there's this thing happening. There's going to be a change. I agree with Luis that, this new sexy math is not going to be confrontational anymore. It's going to be a given. But from here to there, what are the things that happen that add value? And that's what we really, really agonize over. And that's sort of.
And well, when you find out, let us know. I'm going to give the last word. Well, to you, if you want to throw in a haiku or something, I'm going to give the last word to you in terms of what you want people to take away from this and how you want them to be thinking about Cohere right now, because it is a success, but it's a work in progress.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a work in progress. I wouldn't call it success right now, but it's definitely it's doing very well, and it has done.
Sorry,
that's not. Yeah, but definitely, if it continues in this path, it's definitely gonna be a success story mostly because it's creating change. It's disrupting, and creating change, and creating opportunity for many enterprises and companies that want to get into the space.
Transformative.
Yeah.
Final words to you.
Yeah, I guess I would just say if you're a startup, you should be ruthlessly focused on the value that you can add to your customers, and spending all of your limited amount of time doing that probably doesn't mean competing on the large language model layer. And so, you should be having experimentations with all the tools out there constantly, and especially Cohere. If you're an incumbent, if you don't have a red team that is already looking through which parts of your business are now, doable with a large language model versus not, you should do that, because all of your competitors are. And this includes product feature things, workflow optimizations to help your gross margin internally, and all of your dev tooling stuff. So if you're not paying attention, you should.
And from there, I look forward to continuing the conversation. Please join me in thanking Luis and Kory, and I believe we are now standing between you and a chance to socialize over some drinks. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
And thank you.
Success with my terrific